You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on Stimulus Tech Talk. I am Sherry Lipp, Marketing Manager at Stimulus Technologies, and I am here with Stimulus Technology CEO Nathan Whittacre. And today we are going to be talking about physical security, which is not a topic we've talked about too much before and maybe that you might not be familiar with. So I'm excited to chat about this today. Hi, Nathan.
Hey, Sherry, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining Stimulus Tech Talk.
So when we're talking about physical security, what are we talking about?
I think we're talking about everything that's not virtual or not logical. So we're talking about the security of your technology infrastructure, so your servers, your workstations, potentially even your building and access control. But basically anything that's relating to the hardware of your network and your systems.
How does a business determine some of their vulnerabilities when it comes to, or what are the vulnerabilities when it comes to physical security first?
There's certainly a lot of areas that a companies could be vulnerable for. I'll give you an example that we run into a lot when we're looking at prospects or if a current client is moving to a new building. If they have servers, they often have some type of server room because they want to protect the server. But unfortunately, a lot of times when the architect or building engineer is designing the location, they don't give a lot of thought to what that server room looks like. And I mean, we've walked into server rooms inside a company's facilities where there's a hot water heater that's literally right next to the server, or which is crazy because you think about it. Hot water heaters at your house. How often do you come home from a trip and see water leaking out of your garage or in your basement and have this water heater overflowing? So thinking about security from an environmental aspect is, environmentally, are you protecting your equipment? Also on the environmental front, other than floods from a water heater, it could be heating. A lot of times in server rooms, they're using the same central air conditioning and heating system in the building. And that server room in the wintertime is getting heat pumped into it at the same rate that the rest of the office is, which might be fine, but that room, especially if there's not good, recirculation or ventilation, can end up being 90 or 100 degrees. So we've walked into prospects that, you open the door to the server room and it's, 100 degrees in there, which is physically damaging to the equipment. So it's looking at environmental aspects when we're talking about security. And, also there's the actual physical security, locking your equipment up and keeping it protected against theft and harm. And this is your entire office too, thinking about access control systems to your office, whether that's back to a manual key system or, the electronic keys in your building. Those all need to be part of your entire infrastructure security. So when we're thinking about vulnerabilities, you have to look, at the entire environment. You have to look at, both the physical environment and access control to that environment, plus also, your environmental variables, like I said, with water, heat, could be a sprinkler system, things like that. Concerns that you just have to look around, especially if you're moving into a new location. Those need to be discussed with your building planner, your architect, and the engineers to make sure that you're protecting, your network infrastructure.
And, a lot of people think, us as a managed service provider, we're talking about, IT and just digital tech, but is the physical security part of the assessment, when we're looking at a prospect or a client situation?
Always, we're looking at that change in the environment. As I've mentioned, already, that one of the things we look at is that environmental aspect to ensure that whatever equipment we're going to be managing is protected from an environmental and physical aspect. I'll just share a brief, little story. I shared it in the book, The CEO's Digital Survival Guide. And this was from over 20 years ago, and just talking about how these two things interrelate, because, one of the things that our clients ask us to put together and we help our clients with is a disaster recovery plan. And we have to think about all the disasters that can happen to a business, both virtually, a hacker coming in or an employee doing something that they shouldn't be doing on the network. But we also have to look at the environmental side and the physical security side. So in this example that I shared in the book, we had a client that a few of their key managers had left the company. They found out that these managers had been embezzling money from the company. And so the departure was not pleasant, let's just say. And so the owners of the company were worried that these managers that had been fired would attempt to somehow disrupt the operations of the company. They had, keys and knowledge of where their equipment was. Even though they changed the locks, they knew that, there wasn't 24/7 monitoring, with an armed guard there. So there's a time period that somebody could break into their location and steal their equipment. So when we were talking about disaster recovery with them, we talked about, securing down their server in their locked room that they had it in. But their additional concern was, okay, what happens if all these security mechanisms we put in place, don't succeed, and the previous employees were able to break in and steal their equipment. And so, in that light, we put together a plan that we installed a redundant server. This was before the cloud or the internet, or be able to do this, reasonably with the internet services. But we had a secondary server that was replicating their main server, and we installed it in a different different physical location, in the office. And so every 15 minutes that server was replicating all their data. Well, certainly one morning we got a call early, 6-7 o'clock in the morning from this client, and this said, hey, it happened. We came to the office, the door was broken into, we got an alert from the alarm company, and sure enough, they went straight to the server room, stole our servers, and left. So we went to the office. We immediately got their disaster recovery server back up running, and they had no loss of data or time with their employees were able to work immediately that morning. So, we had to look at, okay, where can we put these servers? Where can we secure them? And then in the event that we aren't able to secure them completely, have some redundancy inside their location. So you have to look at all those aspects. Because it is an important, it's an important part of it. It's not just about the virtual security.
And along the lines of that story, how can businesses, use a physical security to help prevent that unauthorized access? I know you said there's a disaster recovery plan, but in the first place, what are some of the methods?
So I think businesses should think about their physical controls. So, we're not an expert on, locks and alarm systems and things like that. There's certainly a lot of contractors out there, but I think companies should think about that. If they have servers on premise, and that's what we're mostly talking about. If they have server infrastructure, network infrastructure on premise, attempting to secure that down. So it should be in a separate room. There should be limited access to that room, so it's keyed. Only managers should have access to that. If you have some type of access control system, magnetic or otherwise access control system, that should be, specifically only allowed for certain, managers in the company to have access to that. I like access control systems that log entry into the system. You can also, most access control systems have integration with camera systems and surveillance. So thinking about putting cameras monitoring the doors and access into their physical infrastructure. And then the other thing is just ensuring that the people that have access, you're logging, the keys that you've given them. And, the biggest issue, like that story, is if you have key employees that leave the company, that you're, terminating them out of the access control system. So you have controls in place that, if the your HR person or, county manager, whoever is handling the termination also notifies the people that manage the access control system, whether it's physical keys or an electronic system, that they remove that access. And then if you're not able to get those keys back, then an immediate rekey of the system should be done. Also remember to remove alarm codes out. That's the other thing is a lot of businesses have, separate alarm systems, and making sure that those employees are removed from those systems. So what we like to do is recommend having a departure checklist. And in that departure checklist, obviously you're notifying us as your IT service provider, or if you have an internal provider, of a departure of an employee. That would be removing their logical accounts, obviously, their emails, their logins to your servers or systems. But also part of that is getting the physical security disabled. So, keys to the office, access control systems to the office, key cards, alarm codes, things like that. Make sure you have that list of things that need to be disabled for each one of the employees when they depart. So we find that there's a disconnect in both areas, from the person terminating to the IT department, but also removing those physical access controls.
And do you think not updating that access for ex-employees, former employees, is kind of one of the biggest things that businesses overlook? Because I've certainly come into places where there's a lot of old information, same password they've always been using, old email addresses in there.
Oh man, it's amazing when we do, from a logical standpoint, certainly when we do an audit or a network assessment, we always pull up a report of the users that are in the system. And I don't know if there's ever been one that the owner has been shocked to see, oh, that employee's been gone for 3 years. Why do they still have access into the system? And if they're being careless about the virtual side, certainly the logical side is also an issue, or the physical side is also an issue. So, considering doing periodic audits, key audits to ensure that you have the number of physical keys, logging into your access control system to ensure that, the keys that you've been given have been disabled for former employees. So periodic audit, maybe once a quarter, is ideal. But ensure that you have the policies in place that you're, doing 99% of the time you're doing it right. What we hate seeing is walking in and finding that most of the time you're doing it wrong. You're not disabling the access, and then every once in a while you get it right, but the audits catch so much. So, it is something that we look at when we do an assessment, is look at that physical side of things. We certainly don't do a full audit of your keys or your access control, but it's something that, as a company, you should have somebody responsible for that side of things.
And if you have to physically move your servers and your hardware, like you're, moving to a new location, is that a security risk or?
Potentially, it depends on how sensitive the data is. We have had instances in the past that, the server was working just fine. You shut it down and you turn it on into the new location and it doesn't start back up. It's a bad day for an IT guy, right? So I think that's where we run into more issues from a security standpoint, is just, or a physical standpoint, is especially when we were dealing with physical hard drives. Now that we're more in the solid state drives, it isn't as prone to that. But some of the things we always take precautions of when we are moving locations is ensuring that we have good backups before that we review the backups of the systems beforehand, ensure that all the critical data is backed up offsite or to some type of other storage before we move it. Because the last thing we want to do is, have a disaster happen caused by, a physical move. So that's that's certainly not a fun day, and often causes a long weekend or work for the IT department.
And so when there's, obviously, depending where you are, the potential for natural disaster is going to, like we're in Las Vegas, obviously heat can be a factor, especially if someone's air conditioning goes out. Are there insurance protections people can use for this for data loss?
So generally, I think general liability insurance generally covers fire or some other type of disaster. So that's something you should review annually with your insurance provider to see what they will allow. I would, always suggest primarily for these type of physical securities is having an offsite disaster recovery solution. We offer a great service that's rather inexpensive as an insurance policy against these disasters. Obviously, a hacking attempt is what we talk about mostly, but fires and break-ins and floods and other natural disasters happen often. And it's a scary thing when you have no data after one of these disasters. I'll share a very sad story. I was talking to my father the other day. My father was a stockbroker in his career, and he, in the company he worked for, their bond department was in the Twin Towers. And unfortunately, they were in one of the top floors, and the people that he worked with weren't able to get out, which is so tragic. I mean, it's when I was talking to him last week about it, he broke down in tears as we were discussing it, because he had friends that he worked with personally, and to make matters worse, all their data. Electronic and paper data were stored in those offices. And we're talking about records of bond transactions that were, millions and, hundreds of millions of dollars that they had no record of after that attack. And so, piecing back this data after a terrorist attack was very difficult. And this was people's money, and investments. Wall Street has certainly changed their policies and the requirements for data protection. But think about it in your business. If it wasn't a ransomware attack, if your building got burned down, let's say your dental practice or your CPA practice or law practice or whatever it may be was suddenly burnt down, and you had to reconstruct all your data. It would put most businesses out of business permanently, because those records are critical to your operations. So having some type of offsite backup service and disaster recovery service, I think, is essential nowadays. And so you have to think about these natural disasters still do happen, whether it's a fire, flood, theft, whatever it may be, it is something that we have to be concerned about. And really the only way to do that is some type of offsite storage.
So you pretty much recommend an offsite backup for any business.
Yeah, every business should have it. And the thing that we run into is, I get this question periodically is, well, we back up to removable drives, and we see this a lot in smaller businesses, that they back up to these removable drives and they take them offsite, whether it's just, the owner's home or, safety deposit box, whatever it may be, that they're, once a week backing that data up to a drive and then taking it offsite. I see a couple of problems with that. One of the problems is it requires human intervention. And a number of times we've gone in to do an assessment and we discuss backups, and they said, well, Sally, our office manager, used to take care of that. I know she did it every Friday afternoon. She'd take that offsite. But Sally hasn't been here for a couple of years, and I don't know who's doing it anymore. And then they ask around, the owner scrambles and says, well, who's doing this? And come to find out, Sally never trained her replacement to do it and hadn't been done for a couple of years. The other thing we find out, so that's obviously a bad problem, that's not happening. The other thing we find out is, like the drive fills up and they're not aware that backup isn't working anymore. Even though they're plugging in the drive, running the software, they're not getting good backups. And then the third problem is they're not testing it. They're taking it offsite, trusting that data is good, and they're never attempting to do a restoration or retrieval of that data. So, a lot of issues with a manual offsite backup. So, as a company, there's two policies that we recommend companies have. And one is a long-term data retention system. And this allows you to restore data from a long time ago if you need data that may have been deleted. And it's really, to prevent that thing, we need this accounting file, that we hadn't worked on for a few years. And then we find out that, somebody had accidentally deleted it, 3 years ago, and we don't have that in storage anymore. So having that long-term archival, I think, is, the first important aspect. And then the other system, which is actually generally a different system, is the disaster recovery system. And so what that system does is it's backing up on a regular basis, usually a couple of times a day. And then that is stored offsite and checked for that the system is booting up, all the data is there, and it can run offsite in the event that there's a major disaster. So in that disaster recovery plan, what would happen is, let's say your building burns down and you want all your employees to work from home. We can create your physical server in the cloud, have all your employees connect to it, do their regular work. And then once you have a new office set up and new servers and new infrastructure, we can restore that data back to your servers so that you're very limited on the amount of time that you're actually down and very limited on the data that's lost. Whereas if you were just doing a backup recovery to that, it could take days or weeks to get that up and running in a cloud environment. Whereas having this disaster recovery system in the cloud allows you to be up and running within a few hours. So there's two systems you really need to be able to work in the event of one of these disasters.
Yeah, and that was kind of going to be one of my last questions here is what kind of technology do you think helps with, the physical security and, obviously the disaster recovery plan? Is there anything else you see kind of emerging here in the future that will help, with that kind of backup?
Well, sir, from a physical standpoint, if you are really concerned and you're running, important data on site, you can have some type of environmental monitoring system in place at your office. So you have, a piece of hardware that's monitoring for water or heat, or fire or whatever it may be, and it sends out alerts when those things happen. So environmental monitoring system, you could spend, about $1,000 and get a good environmental monitoring system with alerting. Access control systems, the magnetic doors and key cards, they've really come down in price, and they used to be quite expensive to put in, but now there's inexpensive options, and so those systems are really nice to install in the office, so that you don't have these physical keys that you're worried about getting lost. So those are some technologies that, a lot of this is somewhat old school. These have been around for a long time, but small businesses can get access to these for a lot less price than they used to be. So those, from a security standpoint, those are two things that I would recommend that you investigate, is having that environmental monitoring for your server room, and then an access control system that you can, key different doors. You can monitor who's getting access to the building at what times, and you can have different security controls across your environment. So those would be the two I'd look at today.
All right. Well, if somebody realizes their server is sitting next to their water heater, what steps do you think they should do to make some changes first?
Well, call us to take a look at that and see what it would take to move that maybe to a different room. It may require, you to spend some construction money to build out a separate room. We also recommend, in your server rooms, if you're hosting them in your office, to have like a separate air conditioning system in that room, because the servers generate a lot of heat. Small split unit where a small unit's on the roof and it pipes down to the cooling unit in the room is a good option. So, talk to a construction company, a building engineer, and your IT people, which could be us, and be able to assess what needs you have. But yeah, certainly if you're in a bad place and have a water heater sitting over the top of your server, which I've seen before, and one of the scariest things I've ever seen in a server room, make sure you take action on that, because that's a huge liability. And think about if your server was offline because your water heater exploded over the weekend, how much damage that would do to your company. So these few measures that you could take can cause you, or can save you, tens of thousands of dollars in downtime in the future.
All right. Well, thank you, Nathan. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks everybody. Have a great day.